is that darn Cardi Jew? They're making us Rabbinates look horrible.
If you've enjoyed this program, please click like and subscribe.
Shalom. God bless everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of the Torah Watchman Show International, LLC, 501c3 company, registered in the state of Maryland, United States of America, registered with the federal government, IRS. If you're an American citizen, either in this country or abroad, you can get a tax deduction, a tax exemption against payroll and everything else for a donation to a worthy charity with zero admin fees. I get nothing off the top for every single shekel or dollar that comes in my company. I just want to get that out of the way. Yes, this is your favorite Cardi Jew here. Hakam Ya'ar ben-Emmett. I hope everyone's been well. I have a very important topic here I stumbled across today at lunch, okay? I don't know why I was searching it, but I also, every morning when I get on my knees and on the floor in my rocking prayer rug and I face Jerusalem and I pray in the Karate style that we had traditionally have forgotten for thousands of years. When I pray, I ask for God's leadership. I ask for his anointing. I ask for his intuitive insight to give me an idea as a witness to him to speak to other people in a way to convey the message that God waiting to say for quite some time. As human beings, we're very diversified, right? Men, women, children, old, young, we all look at the world differently. And if we believe in God, we all have a different way of viewing God, right? And a lot of times we view God differently when we're happy versus then we're sad or miserable, right? And that's unfortunate, But I want to point out something in this video here and pose a question for the title of this video. Are Jewish women property of men? Does that sound outrageous? Well, in the Middle Ages, Rabbinates debated this in the Talmud. They did quite a bit. And unfortunately, Christians and Catholics listened to some of the rabbinical thought about women and their rights or lack of rights. For you to understand properly what I'm talking about, I'm going to give you a brief run through of women's property rights in the United States. I did not know this information until I read it. So please bear with me. Now here's a timeline. In 1769, women's property rights were severely restricted. And we were founded in 1776 when we declared independence, from the King of England and began colonial America and everything else. But during that time, when we had the Federalists talk about Federalist Papers and Constitution and everything else, the men controlled everything. The men controlled everything. The women were the servants of men, and they had very little things to say that represent themselves as a separate identity from their male counterparts. Namely, they could not own any property. But by default, they were the property of their husbands if they got married. Now, to be fair, I'm just going to go through this timeline, and then they're going to share with you what the Torah says versus rabbinical thought. Okay? So in 1839, there was a women gained limited property rights. So they gained limited property rights in 1839. The state of Mississippi, by the way, can you spell that state? Is the first state to actually grant women the right to hold property in their own name, apart from their husband's name. Interesting, right? But only with their husband's permission. This is how you compromise, right? You give a little bit, you take something, right? You can't win everything all the time. Civil rights is an adaptive thing, and it evolves over decades of time, okay? Now, in 1848, the first women's rights conference held in Seneca Falls, okay? Now, roughly about 300 activists, including 40 men, gather for a 2-day convention in Seneca Falls, New York, okay, to strategize how to obtain women's suffrage nationwide. You've heard about Caddy Stanton and Lucreta Molt, some of the others, the women's suffrage movement. Now, understand if you're not an American and you're in Europe and you're in Hungary or Lithuania or you're someplace else in the world, you may have not learned U.S. history the way American citizens at least used to when I did in grade school anyway. But the women's suffrage movement was a great thing that happened in America, during 1848 when men started to give more to the women, like they had the right of God to take or give anything to their female counterparts. But anyway, all kidding aside, women gradually earned the right to vote. They actually earned the right to go to girls-only schools and special education geared and tailored and contoured for women's needs and women's thought. Yes, women think differently than the men, as far as the worldviews and the way we foreign policy and politics and family rearing and all of this, and about jobs in the workplace. This is something that women have fought for. But why did they have to fight so hard in America, was supposedly founded on Judeo-Christian values? Now stay with me. In 1900, women gained property rights for all states. So, kudos to Mississippi, right? Mazel tov. It always has to start with one person or one state. As you know, Mississippi, Alabama, and the South, and Georgia, it was just horrific the way that blacks were treated by Caucasians. You hear about the Ku Klux Klan. You hear about crosses burning in blacks' homes. You hear about lynching, all this horrible, horrible things. As far as African slaves in America, that is horrible and horrific. But I'm talking about women. I'm talking about white women. I'm talking about Caucasian women who were treated pretty much like your ox or your donkey or something that the man owns. I mean, almost like the man had the remote control. Men love remote controls all the time, their TV sets, right? I do too. But they almost had a remote control, and they pretty much told their wife how to think, how to vote in an election, and how to live their life. And even to this day, statistically in America, and I'm coming to my conclusion in this part, is that women are still pretty much not paid the same amount as men, as their male counterparts. Now, they are sometimes women make more than men, but statistically, they still need to pass laws and things like that for women's rights. You hear about politicians like Hillary Clinton and everything else. At the end of the day, how many women do you, if as a president, how many women do you appoint in your cabinet? How many people? How many members of your administration as a president are females or blacks or Asians or whatever? This is what I'm talking about. So it took us quite some time, shortly after we formed this great country. Supposedly, we're all equal in the eyes of God. Not in the eyes of government. Supposedly that is true. But I want to share something here that according to the Talmud, okay? And I'll explain to you quickly where they got their opinions from, okay? So remember, if anyone's confused here, and I'm a Cardi Jew, I consider myself at the young age of 59 to be a Torah scholar. I teach Torah. I have actually been nominated as a rabbinical figure in Uganda because of what I'm doing for those people there. Not germane. I'm not here to brag on myself. But what I'm saying is that the rabbinical thinking, and I'm going to read something to you here, the book of Shemot or Exodus, there is a operative use of a verb that many Rabbinates, as documented in Talmud, I guess in the Babylonian Talmud, when we were still exiled in Babylon and Persia, before the Jerusalem Talmud was codified much later on, after the Great Exile, in 70 CE and 135 CE, is that they looked at the operative language in the book of Exodus, Shemot, actually Parsha Shemot, is that the use of a verb there was in their minds was inclusive, that women were defined as property, just like if you were doing a conjunction with and and things of that nature, that kind of thing. And then you say, in the same sentence without taking a breath, and they didn't have semicolons in Hebrew, and then you speaking in the same sentence about women too. Said, oh, okay. So Moshe meant that women are property given to the man to increase his wealth, just like 1,000 sheep would, right? And many times, and like in Abraham and Lot, in that story that we just read not long ago, is that a man's wealth is directly dependent and proportional to how many sheep and cattle and camel and actually slaves and people that you had working for you, the workforce. Okay. So interestingly, in the book of Davarim, that's Deuteronomy. So we're talking about the operative of a verb phrase in Hebrew, la takmor, that includes, or it appears to include, women in the same breath, in the same context, as talking about different types of property that belongs exclusively to the man. But in Deuteronomy, you flip the coin, okay? So here, now just as a person's car breaks down, we don't say it's the car's bad luck, but rather that is the person's bad luck. Also, when your betrothed wife gets sick, okay, this is not her bad luck and on account of her, but this bad luck and on account of him. There's a dichotomy of thought here in Davarim. Davarim says the reverse, at least it appears to say the reverse, than what the Rabbinates interpreted in the book of Shemot. So again, in Shemot, the Torah uses the same verb to refer to coveting a man's wife. The Ten Commandments, coveting a man's wife and coveting his property. Okay? So when you covet your neighbor's ox, or you covet the neighbor's wealth or house or estate or his gardens or whatever, they look at the word "you shall not covet" inclusive to a wife or woman. In other words, you should not covet under your neighbor's wife because it's adultery, right? But just bear with me here and I'll try to explain this to you, suggesting a similar way of seeing these two as possessions of a person that another man wants to make his own, which is forbidden in the Torah, okay? More significantly, the prohibition against coveting a man's wife is part of a list which includes his slaves, his ox, and his donkey. So God was saying essentially, the way you should have looked at this, do not covet anything. Anything. And God was giving examples. You're not to covet another person's wife. You're not to covet his daughters. You're not to covet his wealth, his oxen, his sheep, or camels, or whatever he has. If he has indentured servants there, that are highly skilled artisan, you are not to get jealous and envious of that, okay? This is what God was saying. You shall not covet, you should not covet your neighbor's wife. You don't commit adultery in thinking and being obsessed with her, okay? So this is what the rabbinical thought was in Shemot, okay? So this list is generalized by the end of the verse, or anything which is of, okay? Now listen, grammar is very hard to understand in Hebrew if that phrase or that sidra is used in an alien context that you are not familiar with. What am I talking about? Well, in Hebrew, it's a lot different than English rules, okay? You have past perfect tense, you have, future tense and things like this. The tenses, for past and present and future, and a little bit different than English, okay? And of course, grammar could radically change the meaning of that sidra or that sentence that you're trying to say if it's used out of context. So what I'm saying is the Rabbinates took something, the author was Moshe, the divine inspiration was God alone, Jehovah, but it was to each their own. The Rabbinates formed their own opinions. Of course, that's what the Talmud is, a bunch of subjective opinions and debates about all kinds of things, okay? And the subject of women and property, okay? So when it says do not covet your neighbor's house, that's inclusive of everything that's in the house, right? His wife, his children. So everything in that list is part of the neighbor's household, okay? So it's possessions and broadly speaking, okay? The opening and closing phrases are sort of as they call a verb phrase in Hebrew, la takmor, called kalal, a general category, okay? Generalistically, specific list, and then another general category of all these things: wives, slaves, animal. Listen, in ancient Hebrew, when you have war and you capture, the people, if they're not all massacred or killed off in the war, sometimes God allowed you to bring the women that were virgins and bring the children to increase your tribal net worth, per se, your estate, your real estate, that kind of thing. So these women here, if you desired them, want to have intercourse with them, essentially God says she's your wife. So many people say Hagar was actually the second wife of Abraham because he had intercourse with her to have the child Ishmael. Okay, so understand what I'm saying here. Multiple stories, in the Torah that the Yaakov was married primarily to two women, Rachel and Leah, right? But as they became older and could not have children and became infertile, they offered their maidservants to Yaakov to impregnate, to comprise all of the 12 tribal leaders as we know and love today, okay? It's very interesting here that here the wife is not seen as a possession in Davarim. So I mentioned before, in contrast, Davarim, if you read that in proper context, the coveting of a wife is treated very differently than what was supposed in Shemot in Exodus, okay? So the verse singles her out as a separate prohibition, okay? The two prohibitions are separated by a break in the verse indicated by the u, okay? In Hebrew, okay? She does not appear in a list together with a man's possessions as his collateral. I mean, everything is net worth, and every person has a net worth. Is your house worth $1 million? What is your total estate, your 401k, all this stuff. So she is treated differently than, I'd say, non-human elements, okay, like your dog and cat, okay, fortunately. So Davarim is a summary of the previous 4 books of the Torah. So Moshe was getting ready to die at the time. He wanted to be very clear in case people misunderstood him. In the earlier time of Moshe's life, when they first left Egypt, and he wrote down the book of Exodus, and Shemot, he wanted to clarify, okay? And at that time, there's no evidence whatsoever anywhere in the Tanakh, the major and minor prophets, or the sacred writing, that woman was equal to property of immaterial things like animals and gold and wealth and houses and gardens and things of that nature, okay? Moving on, rabbis, okay, according to rabbis, this verb refers to more possessive desiring, okay? So taking steps to make something your own. Opening and closing phrases are a sort of kalal prat Kalal, a general category, specific list, and then another general category, and all these things, wives, slaves, animals, are all examples of things which belong to your neighbor and are part of his household. Ugatarian dimension that it certainly seems to be the case here. Okay? Now, my conclusion with all of this, and I hope it was not confusing, um, the author of this post that I found, and I think it's My Jewish Learning or something, the post humanistic, the word humanistic here, is compassion. It's a compassionate interpretation here, would appear to throw the Talmud on its heels in its gross misinterpretation initially of the book of Shemot. Okay? So, with all things considered, let's wrap this up. Okay? I gave you a brief timeline of U.S. history of the evolution of women's rights, namely to possess property apart from their husband's permission. Okay? The story of the five daughters of Zelophehad provides legitimation of a limited right of his Israelite women to inherit land. And they were the tribe of Manasseh, and they had nothing. Their father had no sons, they just had daughters. Rashi just had daughters, okay? Who did Rashi pass his wealth off to if he had no sons? Just think about that. With the father not having sons, the daughters were left to be destitute because they had no real estate, they had no property, they could not grow anything, they couldn't have flocks of sheep, and so on. So they appealed to Moshe on this. And Moshe appealed to God, and God says the women are right, tribal Israel's wrong, the judges are confused. He said these women have equal right to their father's property as they were sons of him, because the father did not have sons, and his women have worth as individuals apart from any man. The only stipulation was they were to marry within the tribe of Manasseh, marry tribal individuals in the tribe of Manasseh, and then so that they could share that inheritance with them and merge it together. Okay? So that in the Torah itself shows the first, pretty much the feminist movement in the Torah about these brave, courageous women, that stood their own and say, we demand our civil rights. We demand to own property that our father worked so hard, but died without giving us a brother or had sons to be able to the inheritance. Okay? So the loose interpretation in Shemot, because of the way that verb was used at that time, sometimes when you say something and you don't take a breath, well, people infer that you're still speaking the same thought. Okay? However, I'm not saying the Torah is wrong, but I'm saying the Masoret text could have caused confusion as far as what particle or verb or adverb or whatever was used in that time. Anyway, Moshe was very clear in Davarim that women are treated to be uniquely different than other property, other thing that you could possibly covet from your neighbor. Okay? How in the world did we get to the point where we are today, as far as the history of the United States, a man controlling everything said women do not have the right to go to school. They don't have the right to vote. They don't have the right to own property. They don't have equal right to equal pay like men. Where did Americans get these ideas from? Baptist pastors? Christians that read the Talmud or exposed to the Talmud. This is my theory. In the Middle Ages, in Roman Catholic Church and everything else, I'm sure there were some partnerships and things like that between rabbinical thought and Catholic and Christian thought. Even Muhammad was exposed to Catholic thinking, You read in the Quran, you hear about Mother Mary and Angel Gabriel and Jesus and so, et cetera, et cetera. But what I'm saying is that the Talmud was well known even in the time of Jesus, 2,000 years ago. Okay, that commentary on the Torah, the Midrash Torah, all that subjective thinking and debating and everything else. Okay, so that exposure to that caused Christians to misinterpret what the Torah was saying, because the Rabbinates had already locked in their belief as halakha in the Talmud. In other words, to this day, especially among ultra-Orthodox Jews, women are covered head to toe almost like a Muslim woman, like a burqa. Okay? When they marry, some of them shave their head off because that's their path, and then they grow the hair back or wear a wig, and they cover most of their body. Now, modern Orthodox are a lot different. Women have more rights. I'm not picking on anyone, but I'm saying even to this day, in every Orthodox synagogue I've ever been to, women sat apart from men. They sat on balconies, and they sat behind partitions. They were not really encouraged to read the Talmud or read the Chumash of the Torah. They were not allowed to come to the Bima and touch or interact with the Torah scroll. Okay, they weren't allowed to do that. Even in Simchat Torah, when we're all dancing and everything and praising God for the gift of the Torah, and many Orthodox circles, other than some isolated instances I've seen in Chabad, like in Fairfax, Virginia, when I used to go there, is that women are not included in the same men classes as far as yeshiva training. Now today, fortunately, women have earned the right to have their own girl yeshiva. That's a big accomplishment because it didn't always be like that, okay? Now, women are very, very important in the Torah. We don't just pray the blessed memory of the patriarchs, we also pray the blessed memory of the matriarch. Remember the prophet Deborah, okay? She did the work that her male counterparts were too cowardly to do. She actually was a Torah scholar, and she taught the Torah. But, that is not discussed widely in the Talmud, like this story in Shemot about women being the property of their male counterparts, okay? So how do you explain all the ugliness? What I described in the U.S. timeline of how women's suffrage movement, how they moved through decade to decade and trying to get, and as beggars, of trying to get some rights and have property and things of this nature. That decision-making in America came from the Christian Bible and came from Christian pastors, namely Baptists, maybe some Catholic influence too, and all of that came from the Talmud in the Middle Ages. Rashi was in the 11th century, Ramban was more between the late 11th and early 12th century, and so on. When they wrote all the annals of Talmud and compiled it and put it together, it was locked as Jewish law or halakha. And who are you or me to debate with a rabbi, right? Anyway, this is very surprising to me. I'm surrounded by females in my house. I'm getting ready to adopt a preteen from India. Even my cat's a female. Got a daughter, my wife. I'm the only male in this home. And yes, I'm a little bit biased when it comes to my wife and daughter as far as their rights and Torah study. In fact, I've started doing Torah study in my home for my daughter's benefit because she's going to be 8 soon, and she has questions about things she misses in a traditional synagogue setting. So what do you think about this, okay? I just want to tell you what, don't listen to my opinion, but listen to God's opinion, to read the Torah. Now, every message of truth, and this is the ending, my final conclusion, every message of truth in the Torah is this is true, and therefore this must be true. So the Davarim was very clear, and most rabbinical scholars say that women are treated differently than other types of property that you could possibly covet. Then that means they totally misunderstood Shemot, right? And the prophets did not debate this either, okay? The rabbis got it wrong. They shared that wrong thought process with other Christians, either through osmosis or exposure, or Catholic. A lot of Catholic priests and bishops could read Hebrew. Everything was in Latin and Greek and all that too. They looked at it and they talked about it and debated too. And unfortunately, the poor women that were among the pilgrims that founded this great country in the 13 colonies, they had to deal with the same rabbinical nonsense that was inherited to them through their Christian forefathers. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it's needful to you. Please share the knowledge and weapon, love, and truth of everyone willing to hear. If they don't willing to hear it, why don't you change their point of view by changing yourself? Remember, be a Torah builder, not a Torah destroyer. Be focused only on the Torah and the prophets and the sacred writings in our Tanakh and the Jewish Bible. Use the Talmud as historical reference, as stories and things to learn from, but it is not halakha. It's not different than halakha of the laws of Moshe. I'm sorry, and that's why I'm a Karate Jew and not an Orthodox Jew, okay? Because the simplest logical way to understand the Torah is that black and white truth. That more than likely is going to be the right answer. If you're confused in one book of the Torah, read Davarim and see what Davarim says about what's said as law, as halakha in Exodus. Then you will be enlightened, and then you understand exactly what God was trying to say and what we were trying to debate. We get in a lot of trouble when we start debating the Torah, right? God does not make mistakes. Even rabbis have put band-aids all over the Torah and changed things around to their own agenda. Who knows what it is? But unfortunately, women had to suffer greatly in America because of all this confusion